usually if you come from your own heart, if you come from really where you are, it's the truth. If you try to figure out what people want, it almost never works. I just wanted to get it on. I wasn't really worried about my place in history. I just wanted to get that girl on. I knew that the show was a historic because there hadn't been one before. And when I spoke to Edgar Sherrick about it, I had made a pilot for ABC for another show that hadn't sold called Two's Company. And he called me into his office and he said, "We think you can be a TV star. And Clairol would like to sponsor you and we'd like to put you on the air at ABC." He said, "We just need a show." So they sent me a lot of pilot ideas and scripts and stuff, and they were all the same old thing, where the young woman was the daughter or the wife or the secretary of somebody. So I called him up and I said, "I'm reading all this stuff and it seems kind of old-fashioned. Have you ever thought about doing a show about a young woman who has a dream? A woman who's not attached to anybody, but just wants to go out there and be her own person and not get married and live in the big city and have a career." And he said, "Do you think anybody would watch a show like that?" And I said, I really think they would. So he took a risk and he made that show. And it was interesting because we knew that nobody had done it before. We weren't sure if anybody would watch it, but we all felt that was the show we wanted to do. And then, of course, the audience, it really wasn't as revolutionary as the networks thought it was. I mean, it really was a fait accompli. The girls in America were really thinking just like I was. I was of my own time, and that girl was of her own time. Well, I didn't want to do the Lucille Ball show because she'd done the Lucille Ball show, and she was a great clown, and she certainly held that spot. I kind of wanted to do more about what happens to a young woman when she has a dream and she moves to the big city, and her relationships with her boyfriends. In the beginning, there were several, and her relationship with her parents who don't want to let her go. So that was what I had been going through in my life because I was the same age as Anne Marie. And that's what it felt like to me. I didn't want to do a show where I, lit my nose on fire. It was a different kind of message I wanted to be dealing with. Nothing was beneath me, believe me. I wanted to do it. But I wanted to do it within the context of a young woman who, that's why we didn't do a 3-camera show or a 5-camera show. I wanted to do a 1-camera show, so we weren't pressured to have a joke every minute. I didn't want to go, ba-dum-bum, ba-dum-bum. I wanted it to be more of a story. It wasn't part of the goal, but I realized quite quickly that it was what was happening. I was expressing how I felt and what I thought, young women would want to see because that's what I would want to see. And, usually if you come from your own heart, if you come from really where you are, it's the truth. If you try to figure out what people want, it almost never works. But that girl was exactly what I was feeling. And so, of course, it connected with other real young women. And once we got going and the mail started coming in, it was obvious that we'd hit a really big nerve. And it's interesting that Gloria Steinem would say that because she was just starting. She was going underground as a Playboy bunny and exposing the Playboy Club, and all kinds of young women were writing books about what they were feeling. And Erica Young had just done a Fear of Flying. So this was all happening at the same time. I think that's what they mean by a wave, that a lot of things are happening, and it just has a force all its own. And that girl was part of that wave. Sexual harassment, we did many shows about producers who tried to put the make on Anne Marie and what she did, and she punched one in the nose and all that stuff. I remember there was a wonderful one where she was out of town with a play, and the producer comes into her apartment, her hotel room, and makes a pass at her, and she says, "What are you doing?" And he says, "Well, come on, you're an actress, you're not a librarian." And she punches him in the nose, and she says, "That's for all the actresses and all the librarians too," punches him in the nose. That hadn't really been done on television. No shows were really dealing with that because most of the shows were about, families. I think it's from being tired, quite frankly. We worked about 16 hours a day on a 1-camera show. Well, I had been in a lot of plays. I'd already opened on the London stage in Barefoot in the Park. I was chosen by Mike Nichols. I had done a lot of plays. I'd done Under the Yum Yum Tree and a lot of comedies and Two for the Seesaw. And I had also done, View from the Bridge and all those kinds of plays. I mean, I was really a theater actress. I couldn't get a job in television that was worthwhile. I would go up for these little parts, and I'd get a job like, you can go in now, Mr. Addison. I mean, that was my part. So I realized that the theater was a place where I could really get experience. And so I did a lot of summer stock and little theater. And then I got my big break and went to London. So by the time I did That Girl, I was pretty seasoned. Even though I was young, I had a lot of experience under my belt with comedy. I knew where the laughs were. Well, that I got from my father, just by being at the house, it was there. But I always say to young actresses, when they ask me, what they should do, I say, just get experience in community theater so that when your break comes, you'll be ready. You may not get 2 breaks, but most people get a break. So be ready when it comes. Well, I wanted it to be true. So if it's true, it's going to be both sides. It's going to have the comedy and the drama. It'll be funny to fight with your father, for example, in which we had many dad-daughter fights. But at the end of the fight, and it's funny and all that, there was always a little moment where I told my father that I loved him. Or something happened that brought us back together. And that was very important because that's what you do in real life. If you win an argument with your parent, you don't want it to be something that you gloat over. You want to thank them for letting you win the fight and getting past, another passage of independence. He wasn't very religious at all, but he certainly was a man of faith. He had a great belief in goodness and the goodness of people, and he certainly thought there was a God, and he prayed to it and to St. Jude. So I think, yes, I think it did guide him. He had a sense of right and wrong, and so do all of his children. I mean, I often say to people, hey, that's just wrong. And sometimes, people look at me like I'm some sort of dope, Why am I talking about right and wrong? But I think there is a sense of right and wrong in the universe. And you have to adjust to that. You have to think about that. You can't just trudge on through life as if you're entitled to the earth. You're not. You're part of a whole group. My father really was a storyteller, and his whole idea, and he always used to say it to me when I started to work, he said, if you're going to get an audience to follow you, you have to tell the truth the whole way. You can't stop along the yellow brick road for some joke that doesn't have anything to do with your character or with the story. It isn't worth it. You're not Henny Youngman. You can't do non sequiturs. Just always tell the story. And every joke has a beginning and middle and end, and every half hour of a sitcom has a beginning and middle and end. And you need to just follow through with the story. And that was the best advice he ever gave me. So I was sure that every show did have a story, that we were telling a little tale every week. It's all right for it not to be funny for a few minutes. It's important that you take the moments of silence, that you take the moments where the character is thinking something over. It doesn't have to be rat-a-tat, or it didn't have to be for our show, and we made a choice that it would be one camera so we could take those moments to reflect. And you'll see that every now and then in a close-up of me or Teddy, where the characters are thinking about what the other character said without having a fast comeback. That's, you can't do that if you're doing a sitcom in front of an audience. They can't see your face. They can't wait for that moment. And he was great in front of an audience. He had really turned him on, and he enjoyed it. But all of his shows, they were not rat-a-tat either. He took time with his children, where they would be bad, or he would take the time to explain something to them. He and his wife had tender moments. He didn't set fire to his nose too much either. Well, it certainly was the format for the family show. I mean, if you watch The Cosby Show, it's Make Room for Daddy. So many of those shows really did come from Make Room for Daddy. Well, actually, my dad used to travel so much, and my mother hated to sleep alone. So we would take turns sleeping in my mother's big, huge bed, and we'd bring our toys and our things in there. And then when my dad was about to come home, she'd say, make room for Daddy, and we would. And so we said that so much that my father thought that that was a great premise for a show, the idea of making room for this figure that you love that leaves all the time. So that was pretty much our childhood. Billy Persky always says that we were the hand grenade in the bunker, we just blew up the whole thing, and we did. I mean, he created it, and so he has every right to say that. But we were the first. And then all the shows that came after it, I think, built beautifully on it. You know, I mean, Anne Marie never really got a good job, and Mary Richards was a successful reporter at a news station. And then Cagney and Lacey, and I think Kate and Allie was really the next huge step. You know, single mothers, that would have been unheard of when that girl was on the air. But then that happened, and Cagney and Lacey, and then Murphy Brown and Roseanne were imperfect women. You know, Mary Richards and Anne Marie were perfect, you know? Even the mailman loved them. But that wasn't Roseanne, and that wasn't Murphy Brown. They were imperfect women, you know, who were too loud, and one was a recovering alcoholic, had a baby out of wedlock, I mean, all kinds of stuff that really started to say, this is the truth. So I think the truth started with that girl, and then it really grew, and all the way up to Friends, you know. Lots and lots of women come up to me and say that if it hadn't been for that girl, they wouldn't have moved to the big city. If it hadn't been for that girl, they wouldn't have had the courage not to get married right out of college or high school. So it did have a big impact. I mean, I think all television shows do that. Not so much movies, but certainly television shows. And Callista Flockhart and Sarah Jessica Parker and Jennifer Aniston all said when they were growing up, you know, that girl was really, you know, their role model. So it was exciting that they had such wonderful shows after that. Well, Free to Be was amazing because, I mean, we knew we were breaking ground with Free to Be. We went about it quite methodically. We said, we want to do an entertainment. We want to just do an entertainment for an audience. We weren't even thinking about children. And the more we thought about how do you really start changing the idea of gender role models and started to break down racial stereotypes. How do you do that? And the more we talked about it, we said, we have to do this for kids. It's just too late to do it for grown-ups. We have to start with the children. And then we thought about, you know, what would we have wanted to have heard in our own childhoods? Let's just rewrite our childhoods. And I said, well, I'd like to have known that you didn't have to get married, that was not the end, the happy ending of every story. And one of the men said, I think I would have liked to have been told it was all right to cry. And little by little, we figured out what the areas were and that we wanted to build a show, a record, a book with all these kinds of stories for children that would open up all the possibilities of cooperation with boys and girls, of new kinds of role models, of ideas about racism and showing how black and white kids could grow up together and share the world together. It was all of that. We really methodically put it into categories. And we went about that, you know, finding stories and poems and songs that would do that. And actually the most controversial one was William Wants a Doll. William Wants a Doll said that a little boy whose father kept giving him baseball bats and gloves and footballs and all of these things, and he kept saying he'd like to have a doll. And his father wouldn't let him have one. And his grandmother said, of course William can have a doll, because someday he's going to be a daddy too, and he wants a little doll, a little baby to hug and to hold. This was so controversial. And we did it. I played William in the voice, and Alan Alda played the other parts and the narrator. And it was really fascinating how afraid the network was of that piece. They asked us to take it out. Well, now they're going to write a book about the impact of Free to Be on the culture, which is just amazing to me, that piece still, all the kids who grew up on it are now like 31 years old, and they're giving it to their children. So it lives on and on. The album is number 100 on the top 100 albums. I mean, that's just fascinating to me, that a piece that was done that long ago, and it was very awarded. I mean, we won the Peabody and the Emmy and all kinds of things, and a gold record and a Grammy and nomination. So it was awarded in its own time. But the fact that it continues to speak to each generation is pretty phenomenal. You know, Kurt Vonnegut wrote the afterword for the book. And he said, I've often thought that every child should be handed a manual when they're born to tell them how to maneuver on the planet. And this could just be that. And you know, a lot of movies that are made with younger movie stars, like Drew Barrymore and so forth, they all put it in their movies. And we saw I didn't see it, but I was told that Gwyneth Paltrow was on Bravo, you know, that actor studio piece. And somebody in the audience said, what influenced you as a young person? And she said, Free to Be You and Me. So it is amazing. Both of those projects, again, came out of my own heart, you know? So I think this is what I was feeling. I wanted my sister's little girl, Dion, to have better stories to read than what I had read as a child. And she said, well, there isn't anything better. You know, it's still the same old thing. The prince comes and makes it all better and all that. There was nothing that encouraged young girls that they could be astronauts or the president or any of that. And so, or that said to young boys, you know, your sensitive side is something that we want to see. You know, it is all right to cry. You know, it's just as simple as that, to just say that. And I got letters from grown men, one that I really treasured from a man who had a 2-year-old son. And he said, when I heard the song, It's All Right to Cry, I cried because nobody ever said that to me. And I'm going to play this for my little boy because I want him to know that his feelings are acknowledged and they're okay. It's a big thing.